Hi, welcome. Come on in. Let me just put the kettle on and we can relax into a conversation on all the things that sing to our heart. In this episode, I connect with Elliot Friend, a good friend, a devout Jew, someone who I respect and trust and have worked with on wonderful multiple projects in the past, and someone who I recently learned doesn't believe in the ceasefire. And so I hope this conversation helps you, understand that, the world that we're being presented, this divisive, polarizing world where people hate each other, it's not the only world that exists. There's a world like what Elliot and I offer, and what other people are offering as well. And number two, there is a way to have this conversation, no matter which quote-unquote side you're on. And so I hope those two things help you and offer some kind of, or salve in some way during this really emotionally wounding time for everyone. And without further ado, Elliot is going to kick right in.
All states are like that. When I was younger, I was always an anarchist, in principle, like no states at all. But we live in this world and not in a fictional world, and therefore there are states, and we have them, and they do things, and we have to engage with that reality. So I wanted to open with that.
Let's just dive into it then. How does that reality shape how you see the events that are going on right now in Israel and Gaza? How does that passage? All right, we're starting.
The point of having a nation of Israel was to be like the other countries and to have security and power and not be weak, and to be able to defend ourselves and not to be dependent on the whims of other people. And power also has a price. Power also has a cost. Power is something that is difficult and complicated and comes with a lot of other things attached to it. So you don't have the purity of kind of running around just with whatever happening to you, and it's always somebody else.
And for that, I think the nation of Israel deserves to exist. The Jewish people deserve a homeland, right? And that doesn't undo or reduce the, what I've been learning about the Nakba, right? From all of this that's been happening. It's brought a lot of the past, like we've been educating ourselves. And so what happened is terrible. I don't condone that. However, for people to say, well, all the conversations I see about, Israel didn't exist, Palestine was a state, who gives a fuck? It's here now, right? You guys exist now. The nation exists now. We can't retroactively go back in time. And you deserve to exist. You absolutely deserve to exist.
Thank you. And so given that reality, I'm kind of unsure what the people who are supporting Palestine in this want to see, what they want to see Israel do. And yeah, I don't really, most of what I see from Jewish people is, well, this is in personal conversations, and to a lesser extent in the media, is to say, well, they're going to hate us anyway. We got to do what we got to do, and that's it.
But hasn't that been the approach of most nation states over time? So when you read that,
right,
excerpt that you did in the beginning,
it
doesn't mean you go and copy the psychopath that existed before you. It doesn't mean you take a playbook out of every tyrant that came before you. It means you do better. you can do better.
Uh-huh.
You know, and that goes for every country. That goes for America. I mean, we're not done. Like the whole idea of make America great again, it's not done cooking yet. So how can you go back to like, you know, back when the ingredients were put together? And I think, you know, so I'll ask you that. Is there not a duty, you know, let's just go into Judaism. Is there not a duty to do better?
What are you asking me? What do you mean by do better? And
So
are you asking me what the halacha is on how Israel should behave? Like, what does the Jewish law say?
we
Or
can
are
get,
you asking like what are you asking me?
well, I'd love to know what the Jewish law says because I don't know, right? But I know Judaism, and Judaism doesn't say this. Doesn't say go in and assassinate everybody. What I mean is, what my question specifically is that when you cite that Israel has the right to exist, right, in Scripture, okay.
Well, yeah, okay.
When you cite that, and the words are very masculine, and this isn't a diss on masculinity, but the words, the context is very power, right? Power is not necessarily a masculine or feminine thing, but the way that we think of power in nations and country and territory, the modern civilization, the culture that we looks at these terms through a masculine lens, through an aggressive lens, because that's how we see masculinity, which is also distorted. So when you're looking at, you know, Israel has the right to exist, it's in the Bible, etc., does that mean you go and be like every other country, or is there not some sort of call to
So first of all, I think that particular text to me speaks to the inherent corruption that comes with power, right? It talks about all the ways the king is going to wound the people and warning people that if you set up a government, the government is not going to be on your side necessarily. You know, 4 out of 5 people in Israel at the moment, from a poll that I saw, support immediately removing Benjamin Netanyahu from power, or removing him at the end of the war. Usual disclaimers apply. Please check your own sources regarding things that I say. But I'm trying to be as accurate as possible. You know, and his government was prior to the October 7th thing, embroiled in a ton of corruption and antagonism over the judicial reforms. A lot of people wanted him out. He was clinging on to power. There was this whole thing. And so, you know, I'm bringing that particular quote into just to kind of say, like, you know, states are going to be corrupt. Governments are going to do stupid things. With regard to what you're saying, yeah, I mean, ideally you do want to aim higher and do better and everything. The question of what better means exactly and all of that is I think the crunchy part. But yes, definitely one wants to aspire to be a shining city on the hill, as they say.
I think I want to dive into why we're having this conversation. So I did a video before this, just kind of getting into like who you are and why we're having this conversation. So that'll be there in a more waffling sort of context. It was like 45 minutes long by the time I got done with it. It was going off all these different tangents. But the introduction for you is there in the beginning. So there is that for people who want to see that. But I wanted to bring you on, right? And this conversation was actually your idea because you reached out to me after you saw my tweets that were showing signs of distress, I suppose, or just being upset.
I reached out to you because we worked together in the past and talking about radical Islam and other things like that. And I wanted to see if you were all right given the situation. And you tweet, you know, it sounds like you're being emotionally impacted by the situation. And, you know, wanted to check in. And then we got talking and it just seemed appropriate to say, hey, like maybe we could film something.
And people love the idea. And I go a little bit into, you know, your own background, like how you trained me on PVD, how brilliant that was. You used music and art and culture and literature to give me the entire breadth of, you know, what made up an ideology from Marxism to Nazism. And so you have that background. You have that sort of different perspective. You see things you're incredibly intelligent, right? You are very creative. You have an eccentric side, which is beautiful, and I love how it comes up in work. And I talked a little bit about Toke for Tolerance, and I talked a little bit about the Hate Imam campaign that we did that was pretty successful. And so we have this rapport. And I think it's so beautiful that we can, you know, you didn't just call me up and you weren't just like, well, this is what I think, you're blah, 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 which has been my experience. My experience as a Muslim woman who is middle-aged at this
Yeah,
point.
tell me about it. What has your experience been?
Okay, I'm a middle-aged, old-ass, aging Muslim woman who's fucking done my work. I've done my homework. I have earned my reputation. I have the credentials, everything, right? And everyone's like, you know, the community at large, the right wing, the Jewish community, good girl, when I say something that they want to hear. The minute I have an opinion that deviates from whatever the talking points are, it's not only that there's a disagreement. Like, you and I disagree, right? Like,
I don't know if that's true, but we'll see.
Probably. We have some, based on our last conversation.
I'm sure we
right?
do. We can find what to disagree about.
Like, you know, how Israel's going about it. I think it's a mistake, and your view is a little bit different. Your perspective is just different, because you're coming at it from a different angle, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation, was because and I think I mentioned this to you last time, like, we're looking at things from different value systems, right? And Amanda Qureshi had that civic digital leadership course, and the most salient thing I got from that was when people disagree, it's usually because there's 7 sort of values, and they're disagreeing because they're looking at a different value. So not to say that the position is wrong, but that I'm speaking from this value, and you're speaking from that value, and one is not better than the other, it's just a different language. And so, you know, when you called me up, it was you willing to listen, and you have this beautiful ability to just invite someone in and listen to them, you know, and not butt in, not interject, not criticize, not condemn. Whether you're doing it privately, like, that's another thing. I don't know.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I'm always like that. I can get ranting also. So I would love to know what you see, how you see the situation at the moment. The Jewish community right now is super triggered and very jumpity. And I think it's a function of political campaigning generally, especially in this generation, that, you know, you toe the party line, or you're out.
Yeah.
I think that's true in every political space. I don't think that's specific to this issue.
Yeah.
That's true across the board.
I want to start there. I want to start there because you know, to go back to when I have a divergent view, I'm treated like a child by grown men. Like, I'm treated like a little girl that doesn't know any better, and it's just being, you know, just patronized or chastised for having a different.
That sounds
like, you stupid
triggering
girl.
for you.
It's so.
You feel like some of it is sexist.
Well, I fought my entire life to be heard. I mean, to this day, I have to fight to be heard within my own family, and I just stopped fighting it. So this goes back a very long way for me, right? But with you, I don't get that. And when I talked to you, I was able to hear for the first time in over a month, like, why are you guys just so obsessed with yourselves right now, right? And I haven't said that.
So what do you mean by that?
I haven't said that before. It came out right now, but it's so fucking accurate, right? It feels accurate in the way that I'm expressing it. It feels like this obsession with just Jewish lives. Like, look, hostages need to come back, right? What happened on October 7th should have never happened. It was wrong. I don't know how the fuck it happened.
Yes, and it was Bibi's fault in a big way because of his many failures, which we'll get to.
Right. So we're not supporting any of what happened. We're not saying that the hostages' lives don't matter, that the people who killed them weren't mattered, or that even when I talk about the piercing of the Iron Dome is like psychologically piercing the bubble of your own sort of security, that this is a pristine state.
Right.
You know, there is no security on that level. But what was my point? But when we talk about what's going on, what I see on Twitter, when I see on social media, what has been like really frustrating for me, and again, this goes back, and I think what we come into it with is our own projections. What matters to us most in this fight is what matters to us most in our own personal lives, is what I'm seeing, is what I can at least self-reflect on in my own life, right?
People are responding based on their own core values. That's true.
Exactly. And so for me, it's, ever since I was 4 years old, oppression's been a big thing, right? Which is why I got into radical Islam, which is why is this thing happening? Why is this culture this way? And obviously you learn as you go along, and you've come across your own discoveries. But when I look at what's going on in the context of Israel and Gaza, I see so much concern from Jews for Jewish identity-based issues. Jewish lives, Jewish hostages, Jewish state, of course, right? But there is no empathy for what's going on in the next person's life. And I don't understand that. I don't respect it. And when I hear you talk about, when I spoke to you last and you talked about the emotional triggers, like you guys are triggered as a people right now, and I want you to talk about that, because when you said that was the first thing I heard in 45 days, Elliot, that made sense. That I understood, okay, this is where you guys are coming from. Can you get into that?
Okay, so first of all, it must be horrible for the people who are in Gaza. I'm sure they're suffering immensely, and I feel for them, especially the children. However, no, I don't want to put a however, full stop. New paragraph break. Yeah, like the October 7th attack in its style of attack was structurally a pogrom. It's the same kind of thing that happened in Imperial Russia, in Ottoman Iraq, in Grenada, in North Africa, in so many places where non-Jews, both Muslims and Christians, have decided, all right, like, let's go to the Jewish town. We're going to kill everybody. We're going to rape the women. They shot people in front of their children. They, were raping people and sliced their breasts off, like all kinds of horrendous atrocities. And I don't want to argue the toss about this or that or exactly, the number and the detail. I think that's a waste of time. Committed heinous atrocities and filmed it. And that was the first time I've ever seen something like that in my lifetime. So somebody that I know said that, they feel like we're living our grandparents' lives, right? Like this is what happened to our grandparents. Yeah. And yeah, we're just not going to stand for it, right? And now we have an army and we have a state, and we're going to find the people who did it, and we're going to kill them all. Every single one of them. We're going to kill them all. And we can't stop until we're finished. And that's really it, right? And anybody who isn't on board with that right now emotionally is the enemy. And that's just where we're at.
How many people is it going to take? How many people need to die?
However many it takes.
But do you see that?
That's open-ended. That's not a numbers thing, because it's a question of how many fighters does Hamas have, right? Like how many fighters do they have? Like however many fighters there are in Hamas, that's how many people need to die. In terms of the civilians and everything, ideally not a single civilian would be killed. Obviously Hamas use human shields. They hide in hospitals. They deliberately fire their rockets from kindergartens and all of that. So, which is a war crime, by the way. So there are going to be a certain number of civilian casualties. Could Israel do more or less? I really don't know. I was never in the army. I don't have a military background. I watched General Petraeus' lecture. I highly recommend watching General Petraeus' take on the military situation. He knows a lot more about it than I do, having commanded several wars. So I'm not going to backseat drive the war and say like, oh, they should do this, they should do that, like as if I know,
Does 13,300 dead in 45 days? How does that make you feel?
It sounds crunchy.
What does that mean?
It's war. It's wartime. What did people think is going to happen? I definitely feel bad for the civilians who are involved in that. I'm sure some of those people are civilians. We don't know. I don't trust the Hamas figures, but I'm sure it's a lot of people. I'm sure it's they're getting figures from the Gaza Health Ministry, but I don't want to get, and I don't trust anything that Hamas says, but plus or minus, it could be more.
Okay,
we don't know how many people are trapped under the rubble. It could be 20,000. We don't know.
This idea that it's war.
What do people think happened in World War II?
But is the pattern the last century what we need to look for as a pattern
what
of
I'm,
how we move forward? And that's
what I'm saying is
we can't do better. We can't do better. We can't, even
all
things like
my
cutting off the water access. There's been so many stories of, and this is my personal question: is there any accountability for the IDF? Because even before this Gaza situation that is in recent, times,
Mhm.
we have a huge Arab community here, right? It's a pretty big community, and it would not
here
be
here being
in Orange
California.
County, right? It's a pretty large Orange County Arab community,
Oh,
and it was not uncommon to hear stories in between the news cycles of just everyday people. Someone's brother got shot in the back by the IDF. Someone this, someone that. Like there just seems to be this very sort of, Gestapo like boots on the ground. They're gonna do whatever they want, take whoever they want, and there just seems to be no discernment between how they operate. The videos speak for themselves. It's, from a PR perspective, it doesn't do any favors. And to go back to the idea of a war and anything goes in a war, we're not at a religious war now.
all right. So I didn't say anything goes. I said that there are going to be large casualties. Israel has a legal department within the military that my sister-in-law was in, by the way, when she was in the IDF. She can't talk to me about it because she signed a thing. You're not allowed to talk about it. But they have a wing within the army who's responsible for making sure that the army obeys the Geneva Convention and other treaties, right? They also have, during basic training, a session on this is when you must disobey your officers. If your officer asks you to go into a village and just shoot everybody, you must disobey your officer. If your officer asks you to rape somebody, you must disobey your officer. It's part of the training. And it should be. The reason why I'm hesitant to answer, they should or shouldn't do more or less, is simply because in the fog, I don't know what they're doing and what they're not doing. I support the prosecution of the war and the elimination of the Hamas. In terms of should they do more, should they do less, should they bomb this hospital or not, those decisions are being made at a level that I'm not privy to. And I have to hope and trust that they are obeying all the laws that they say they are obeying. Now, in terms,
I love that you said that they have these departments, that these departments exist, and I think what we're dealing with is a failure of trust. Like a lot of people don't trust Hamas,
right?
And you shouldn't. They're a terror organization.
Right. And I understand where it's coming from for the other side to be like, we just don't trust the IDF, what they're saying. In terms of I want to answer your other point too, before this. Yeah, I think it's a facet of the fact that there's been no peace process and the fact that the IDF is routinely in a position where it has to go in and raid these towns and whatever, and the ongoing terrorism, the ongoing hatred, and the lack of a final status resolution to the whole situation, right? I supported the withdrawal from Gaza when it happened in 2003. I was a child, but I supported it. I wish that I supported the peace plan in 2008 that was rejected. We could be sitting here talking about, hey, we're coming up on a 25-year anniversary of a Palestinian state. If Yasser Arafat had said yes to the dress in 2000, and I will never forgive him for saying no. But we're not those men. We cannot, undo the clock. And, who knows, if we'd seen the paperwork, maybe we also would have said no if we'd really been in the room and known what was actually offered, right? Yeah. So I hope that they can come to a final status agreement. And you're going to have tension if you have an army that is militarily occupying another group of people. You're going to have situations where there's tension, and you're going to have situations where there's problems. And they do have military police, military lawyers. One of my family friends is a member of an organization of middle-aged women. And what do is they go to the checkpoints and they pop up on deck chairs and harass the Israeli soldiers. And they're like these moms, right, sitting there, and there's these 18-year-old boys. Huh?
Are they Jewish, or what are they?
They're Israeli women.
Okay.
And they go and say, hey, young man, don't put that rifle in his face, let him through. And they nag the 18-year-old soldiers. And what can they do? It's like their mom, right? So they have to be like, okay. and like obey the rules because their moms are there nagging them. Um, you know, an army is made up of individuals, and individuals on occasion misbehave. And where they do, there are processes in place. Now, I do think that it's a very serious situation now because of this national triggering, which has taken place because of the October 7th attacks. And we've all seen like pretty bonkers comments from some of the Israeli front bench, which are, you know,
Well, the
a
most
little
recent
much.
one was the a former Israeli military leader that basically made the case. I have the link if you want it. Made the case for genocide. Who said that we need to go and eradicate everyone and their culture and their history and the people.
I
This is
haven't
what
seen that
this is what he
particular
this came out today or
particular clip.
yesterday.
I'm not
Yeah.
denying or affirming. I haven't seen that particular clip, so I can't speak to it. Um, I've definitely heard comments like that from people, three whiskeys in or whatever. Yeah, we're very angry at the moment because of this. Like, we withdrew from Gaza the way we see it, we withdrew from Gaza voluntarily. They could have built a lovely state, a little state there, a lovely little place. They had the international backing. They've had billions of dollars in aid. And and what do they do? They turned it into a terrorism enclave, and all the aid money that was supposed to go to build schools and hospitals has been stolen to make rockets and tunnels and attack us. So, fuck you a little bit. And we're going to get rid of the Hamas, and they have to be stopped. Now, it was Bibi's fault for propping Hamas up for all these years and for using them as a wedge to divide against the Palestinian Authority. And that was a bad policy that he should not have done and that I am against personally. And many other people on the Israeli right are also against it. Lieberman was speaking about this years ago about saying to Bibi, you can't do this, you can't crop up the Hamas, it's going to come back and bite us. So that's where we're at in terms of that. I think that if the pro-Palestinian community is interested in Israel not committing genocide, the best way to do that is to calm Jews down rather than um, double down, because the stakes are just too high. Like
When
we have to drop the shit.
I love that you brought
So
that up because that's when this first happened. The first thing I saw was people are going to say Hitler was right. All of those things is going to get worse. I mean, those everything that you guys as a people have been fighting against and putting billions of dollars into just goes, down the tank. It just gets flushed down the toilet.
right.
Just to make it super quick, everything from the IDF soldiers, the women doing TikTok videos, while
Mhm.
people, the optics. How in this day and age are you not aware? Not you, but as a people who are savvy people, you're savvy people. You're smart. You know what's going on in the world. How do you not know the optics of what it looks like when you've got the visuals on one side and then you've got IDF soldiers talking about doing suntans, or the men doing taking suntans, or the women doing like rave dances. You've got this every narrative is all about Jewish this, Jewish that, and there's no inclusion for a broader community other than just. And the example I'll give you, and I mentioned it before, but I want to make sure I bring it up here, is when I was working with a Jewish organization, and the colleague I was working with, I adore her. I think she's amazing. I don't agree with all her views. I think some of them are a little bit, back there. But I do respect her as a person. I do like her as a friend. And when the 2017 storming of Al-Aqsa happened, and I'm not a mosque-going Muslim, I don't pray 5 times a day. I'm not particularly like religious on paper the way that you think that a Muslim should be religious on paper, but I am deeply spiritual, and I've committed my entire life to this cause. This is my entire life. When I see footage of, and I talked to Uthman, right? I talked to him about this yesterday, actually, and he had some
Yeah.
great perspectives that toned down my own sort of emotional reaction, right? Because, again, for me, it's oppression. I see oppression, it's like, boom, that's my trigger.
Right.
So I have to be wary of my own triggers. Like, what is it that's, where is that reaction coming from? But when I saw the boots on the prayer mats, there's things that are happening in Al-Aqsa. You need a military presence at a certain point. You need the IDF to go in, whatever. I understand that, right? But when it goes to beyond a certain excess, when it goes to just people just being pricks to people who are worshiping, that I don't understand. And when you had when I'm talking about in 2017, my grievance with seeing images of worshipers being abused, people who are elderly, we have the same culture. The elderly should be respected. You respect faith. These are basic principles. We have so much in common as Jews and Muslims.
Sure.
When I was telling my colleague this, she couldn't understand, and I think this is really important, she couldn't understand why as a Muslim I would be upset at looking at those images. And I don't understand what's going on with the psychological makeup of the community right now, where they just, I get you're only going to talk, not you, but I get the community is only going to talk about Jewish issues. Of course, everyone talks about what's most important to them. I get it. But this inability to see what it's like for somebody else, the empathy, there's a dehumanizing element in it. And it's, it comes up again when I say something and I'm chastised like a little child, like, you're just a little kid, you're just whatever. And the words are not kind and people get,
Right.
when it...
Okay. So I can speak to that. The first thing is, I think that when people are emotionally triggered, it's harder for them to have any empathy. That's just a psychological reality to do with how our brains are wired. And that's true for everyone. The second thing, and the footage, the continual footage of atrocities and things keeps people in that emotional state, right? Like the fact that we can watch the footage of what happened. We didn't just read about it. We can actually watch the clips, of what happened on October 7th and in other terrorist attacks, throughout the years. That's the first thing. So, as I said, like we're at war, and that means like shields up, right? Like put your own oxygen mask on first. And if someone's on the other side, fuck them, right? Because it's wartime.
With that? Does that make you comfortable? Because it doesn't make me comfortable. That mindset doesn't make me comfortable. It never has.
It's a very aggressive mindset. I understand that doesn't make people comfortable. My point is not to be angry and to express that feeling to you. I'm just describing a reality that I'm seeing.
I want to understand it because it's the same thing. It's the same reason I left the political right, because it was fuck you, I got mine, screw everybody else. That's the reason I left conservatism.
Yeah, they have that undercurrent, don't they, of like very but okay, so the final thing is I think underneath all of that is an idea that the world has always hated Jews and always will. There isn't actually a right way that Israel could behave in which we would be accepted, and that all of the efforts and the optical wrangling and the attempts to look after Palestinian human rights are just going to be thrown back in our faces. Oslo, the multiple offers of statehood, the daily 4-hour humanitarian pauses that are in Gaza, the efforts that the IDF makes to warn civilians to get out of the way, the billions of dollars in aid that we've allowed in via Qatar and other places, the endless peace conferences, the fact that we have all these human rights organizations even allowed in the country at all to go and help the Palestinians and everything. From our point of view, we do a lot to try to support the rights of the Palestinian civilians. I appreciate it doesn't always look like that. And so to have to kind of constantly fight these allegations, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, you did this wrong, it just feels like, you know what? Y'all never cared about us anyway. You all wanted to kill us anyway. So why the fuck should we spend all this time and energy caring about what you think? You know, the New York Times poetry editor resigned. Okay, so she resigned, you know. Like, there was an article in the Times of Israel today which summed up this attitude. It says the headline was, "Dear world, I don't care."
And who was that by?
Oh, I can't remember. Let me look up.
Was it
I'll
a
look it
Jew?
up.
Was it a non-Jew?
It was by a Jew. It was by a Jew, and it was widely shared on the internet. And it was. I thought it was interesting because it's a kind of epistemic breakpoint where people are saying publicly, "Hey, we just don't. We're just totally uninterested in how the world sees us, and we just need to win, and that's it." And you know, it was by Avi Lewis. Dear World, I Don't Care. Published. Oh no, published on October 30th. But I saw it today. You can find it on Times of Israel. Yeah, I mean that's how a lot of Jews see it, and I totally get why they see it that way. So like my question to you is like, okay, like is there actually anything that we could do, right? The question everybody we've all been asking is, well, what would you do, right? Like how do we get to security?
You were talking about Jews saying, okay, well, they're going to hate us anyway, right? And then you brought up that, what was the title of the New York Times headline?
Of the Times of Israel, dear world, I don't care.
Okay. I want to address two things,
But
right?
that is kind of where we're at with it. I think this is what I wanted to say. I think basically we're trying, and by the dehumanization and the lack of empathy, I see 100% from the other side. Also, the people ripping down the kidnap posters are abhorrent, and they're all going to be fired. By the way, the organized Jewish community is currently waging a total Popular Front campaign to get canceled everybody who is publicly supporting Hamas, right?
That's so confusing, though, Elliot, because everyone is supposed to live. What I'm seeing on Twitter, right? So I don't know. We have to distinguish between idiots on Twitter and the public consensus on Twitter and whoever is organizing this and however that gets rolled out. What I'm seeing on Twitter is that anyone, and these are from like influencers, right? Political influencers, pundits.
Yeah, like fairly big people, right?
Right.
Not just like random schmoes.
Exactly. Anyone who was at a protest, and the protest is a mixed bag, right? It's a mixed bag of people. You've got some nasty people who are using this as an opportunity to let their mask slips and come out and be exactly who they are. You've got a lot of people who care, and you've got agitators as well. But the thing that they're doing is saying that, oh, anybody at the protest is a Hamas supporter. This is a pro-Hamas protest. It's not accurate. And we keep doing this as a civilization. I mean, you know this from when we worked together at PVE. There's no distinction in language between one thing and another, so that it all becomes the same thing. Like when they compared the Taliban to the conservatives in Texas who were banning abortion. They're not the same thing. You know, same thing like they were saying Hamas is ISIS. Hamas is not ISIS. ISIS is much worse. And it's not the same thing, but it's sloppy, it's careless, and it's dangerous, and it disrupts any sort of actual process of peace or conclusions. How do you feel about going out having a campaign against, for canceling people who support Hamas when you can't distinguish who Hamas is?
I can't distinguish who. Anyone publicly calling for a ceasefire is functionally a Hamas supporter.
I cannot agree with that. Do you agree with that?
Yes. Anyone who has a platform who is publicly calling for a ceasefire that is a unilateral ceasefire, right? That Israel stops and Hamas remains in place. That is a pro-Hamas position.
I don't think anyone's asking for that. Anyone
Yeah,
see
that's what If Not Now are asking for. That's what Jewish Voice for Peace is asking for. That's what Jeremy Corbyn is asking for.
they're asking for a
That's
ceasefire that's unilateral?
yeah.
I haven't heard
Israel
that.
stops and Hamas just
I
continues.
haven't
None
heard.
of these protests have, oh, said bring back the hostages banners. They're all pro-Palestine, Israel stops, Hamas continues. That's a pro-Hamas position. And by the way, the person who organized the pro-Hamas rallies in Britain was himself on the board of Hamas. He was a Hamas member. He now lives in Barnet. And he was involved with organizing this protest. The Daily Telegraph did a whole study on the
Piece of
links of the
total
people who
piece
are
of shit.
organizing the rallies to
Right.
Hamas itself. So that is the view, that's the position, and so
How do you
all these
execute that?
people, huh?
How do you execute a campaign to cancel anyone who is calling for a ceasefire? How is that even?
Anyone prominent? I think if some random college student goes on a pro Hamas rally, they basically probably didn't understand what they were signing up for. May well not like Hamas, probably couldn't locate Gaza on a map. Probably don't know the difference between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. They just have a kind of vague commitment to peace and think it's all awful. And they saw a couple of videos online. And they're like, oh no, this is all sad. I want the children to not die. Like that person is not a Hamas supporter. They're an idiot, but they're not a Hamas supporter. And so I don't want them to be canceled. I'm talking more about like higher level people, like professors, and people who are organizing.
Is the U.S. government a Taliban supporter because we went to the negotiating table with Taliban and gave the country back to them on a silver
I
platter?
think that was a pro-Taliban position. It was a pro-Taliban thing to do. It resulted in the Taliban.
What about us now working with the Qataris? There have a lot of Republicans going to Qatar, working with the Qataris, pro-Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, I
See
think
what I'm
that's an
saying?
absolute disgrace.
It can't be what you guys are up against such an uphill battle. It's Hamas today. It's how many Muslims tomorrow? I mean, I just don't see how the campaign's going to work without shooting yourself in the foot, looking like you're trying to shut down everyone who doesn't like you.
I don't want to cancel everybody who doesn't agree with Israel or everybody who doesn't agree. I think I want to cancel people who are actively using their political positions and their public facing positions to keep Hamas in power, because they are a violent terrorist group that murders Jews. And if they're using their positions in the West to try to ensure that that regime stays in place, they don't care about the people of Palestine for sure. The people of Palestine are the ones who are suffering the most from Hamas rule. I would highly recommend that everybody follow the Green Prince, the son of the Hamas founder, who speaks very, very, very well on this topic about the vital importance of getting rid of Hamas from the Palestinian cause. Now, if you want to say, okay, we want to get rid of Hamas, let's do it in a different way. Absolutely, we can have that conversation, right? But it has to start with we're actually going to get rid of Hamas now.
It does
If
need to
it's,
stop.
oh, we're going to stop, we're going to have the ceasefire, Israel's going to stop the war, and then what? And then Hamas will still be in power. They'll still have the hostages. They're going to kill again. They've said so.
Exactly.
That's just the Hamas position. Hamas's whole goal with this war was to goad Israel into killing enough Palestinian civilians that the Western human rights community successfully lobbied the United States to pull the plug on the war, right? That's their whole game plan. So the activism that's taking place in the West is one of the most important parts of the war. Militarily, Hamas don't have a chance, but they do have a chance of winning this like media campaign war to try to get the United States to stop supporting Israel. And if that happens, then Hamas will still be in place. This conflict will drag on for another decade, maybe more. Countless more people will die, many of them Palestinians. And I just don't understand how anyone with a conscience could support that. The only explanation is, as far as I can tell, either they're an anti-Semite and they hate Jews, or they are mentally ill in some kind of way, like they have just they're mentally ill, or they don't know the facts.
I think most people don't know the full spectrum, right? Because I asked a really well-known author who speaks about just social justice and feminism, that sort of intersection against patriarchy, all of that, really well respected. She is going on and on about, what's going on, right? And so I asked her, and I asked her community the question of, like, well, what comes after a ceasefire? Because as someone who's been in extremism for so long, within that field, I do know that as much as the answer one woman gave was just, first start was just stop the slaughtering, right? Great. But it's not a technical response. The technical issue is what you just said, which is, obviously we want people to stop dying, right? That's number one. How that happens.
Yes, and I agree with that.
Right.
Ideally, no more Palestinian children will die.
Right.
And
But what happens, like, say tomorrow, like, so I can't say, oh, I'm for a ceasefire. It's not, I'm for a ceasefire, period. I'm for a ceasefire, and what happens next? Let's have a plan for what happens next, because just calling for a ceasefire doesn't change, the
right.
system.
So I would love to see more about like what happens next. I'm for an end to the conflict. As far as I can tell, what's really happening is that there's two different scripts, right? For us, we're running this like Israel is the most successful decolonization movement of all time. We are indigenous to the land. It is our land, and we have a right to be there. It says so in the Bible. We have a UN mandate. We have rights of long-standing presence. All our cultural sites are in Israel, and of course, right of conquest.
What does right of conquest mean?
I mean, it's a universally accepted principle of international law,
Which is
dating back hundreds of years, thousands of years. That right of conquest is just we are in possession of the land.
We can't. Can we really still be holding on to these like right of conquest? I can come to your house now and say.
Hey, I said all the other stuff first. That was the last thing I said. That was the last thing I said. I said all the other stuff first. Okay. It's in the Bible. We have a UN mandate, the only country ever to have been voted into existence at the UN. Terms and conditions apply. Perhaps other countries have been voted into existence as well. It's ours by right. Abraham is buried in Hebron.
I'm not discounting that. I do.
So listen, I understand you want to say, okay, right of conquest is bullshit. Fine, but what about all the other legitimate reasons why?
I'm not saying right of conquest is bullshit. I'm asking you to consider the terms that you're using, which are very archaic, outdated terms in their original context. Right.
I'm listing principles by which the state of Israel exists. So that's the terms that I'm using.
Well, I don't want to argue the state of Israel's existence because
I'm not arguing that. My point is that is how we see it. But the other side sees it as Israel is a settler colony that has no right to exist at all. While the Holocaust was a tragedy, all these imported people came in from Europe after the war, and by the way, 850,000 Jews were expelled from Muslim countries, in 1948 and moved to Israel forcibly, and have to flee their homes in the middle of the night with the bags, which is more people than were Palestinians expelled. We've never had an apology or any kind of recognition of that at all, ever, from any Muslim country.
I don't think we can go back and restructure the past. It's not going to be possible.
I'm not asking for compensation for that or whatever. I'm just saying, if we want to go back there, we also have grievances, yeah? So, moving...
I do want to say that it is indigenous, but it is also behaving like a settler colony. It's both.
So the idea that it's a settler colony makes sense if you see the world from a kind of left-wing communist lens, and that many of the Jews were European. Obviously, I do own a mirror, right? I understand that I look a certain way and talk a certain way. And it could be construed that perhaps I'm white and British.
Elliot is very Jewish, guys.
And sound colonialist. There was plaques on the chapel in my high school for the old boys who died in India, keeping it British. Right? I do get that. I do understand that. And basically, the Palestinians are running a traditional post-colonial liberation movement modeled on the Algerian successes, the successful Algerian decolonization movement. in other places where it was successful. And I think they're freaking out because they're like, this should have worked already. Like if they were fighting anybody else, if Israel really was a settler colony, Israel would have given up like decades ago.
Hmm. Well, you're not going to
Given
give
how
up. You're
hard the
not going to give up your
Palestinians.
land. You're going to want more land. I mean, look at the settler initiatives where you're just going over and taking. It's. I mean, I don't. It's there.
Oh, you mean in the West Bank,
Yeah,
in
it's.
Judea and Samaria?
I mean, all the settlements that are just, you kick people out, you come in the next day. I mean, that, I don't want to get into that because I do have a couple points and I want to get into questions people had for you.
So,
When you said they hate us anyway, right? That was, and then you mentioned, dear world, I don't care anymore. That, I think, out of the entire conversation that we're having, I think those are the two most salient points, because when I spoke to you last time and you said, they're going to hate us anyway, I got it, because those of us who have been villainized and who are seen as black sheep, they're going to hate us anyway. Like, you just come to that fact,
right,
right? And there's sort of detachment that you have with that social contract that you have with other people. Then that's one thing.
right,
But I think, I really hated interfaith. I think it's a lot of bullshit. But because it's just pomp and prance and performance and people feeling good and activism. But I think there's potential for interfaith, and I think where our wounds are, where our triggers are, there might be that potential. Because
yeah, yeah,
when you said they hate us anyway, the first thing I thought of was what Muslims are saying. They see us as savages anyway. They see us
right,
as non-human anyway. Why are we trying so hard to
right,
fit into their land and into their territory, into their culture? They think we're savages anyway. And I
right.
think there's something there. And when you said "Dear World," when you quoted, was it Times of Israel, where it was "Dear World, I don't care anyway." It was this actor Wentworth Miller. I don't know if you know him. He was on this show called Prison Break. He's autistic. He's a genius. He's beautiful. He had a post on Instagram where he addressed people calling him out for, like, why don't you fucking talk about blah blah blah. And he had this
Right.
gorgeous post that I recommend anyone go read it. It's basically just a post with no picture. It's just white. The second one dated yesterday, I think. And he said, why don't you talk about blah blah blah? He goes, what's left to say about blank or blank or blank or blank or blank? What's left to say? Thoughts and prayers. Like and subscribe. Launch me into the sun and drown me in the lake? Question mark.
Right.
And I think we can feel that, right? Like, we can feel that at this
Yeah.
point, anything short of putting yourself on a sacrificial altar to your, opposition, anything short of that is not going to be satisfactory.
So this is why I think that that's the case. So then that is why we're running this cancel everybody campaign. Because the response then is like, all right, well, like if they're not going to like us anyway, the only thing left is victory. And so we have to go and win.
Okay, so where do I
Uh,
fit into that? Because I obviously love Jewish culture. I love the Jewish faith. Some of my best friendships are with Jewish men.
uh,
You're one of them, and I'm vocal about what's going on. I have an emotional response. I have
that's
a
fine.
response from. I don't think there's anything wrong with emotional response. I think emotion measured with
Right.
reflection, there is value in that.
Yeah.
But I'm not
So
an anti-Semite. But I'm blacklisted. I've been blacklisted for years.
I don't think you should be blacklisted. So first of all, um, because of how triggered everybody is, some people are going to go overboard, right? And that's happening on both sides. I see a lot of absolutely insane reactions all the time. Professors endorsing the Hamas attacks, people saying, we stand with Palestine and that means any resistance is justified. People ripping down the kidnap posters, people chanting, there is only one solution, Intifada revolution, in the street. At Sydney Opera House, they were screaming, gas the Jews at a pro-Palestinian rally. Like, okay, so obviously we're going to go to war with that, right? That has to be stamped out.
I think anyone with a human
Um,
consciousness has to
and
go to war
and
with that.
also, people who are Jewish, but it's a mutual thing, right? Like all these people who are Jews who are saying, crazy things. I think also people are coming after them and writing letters to their jobs and saying, hey, your employee said whatever he said, do you really want to be associated with that, right? Like if people are gonna come out and say like we got to kill every there was a tech guy who said, we've got to hold the Gazans in a big re-education camp,
Put who in a re-education camp?
it was some tech guy, I can't remember his name, but he had to put his Twitter on private, he was getting
No,
harassed,
what did he
everybody.
say?
He said that they have to do
Who's they?
to Gaza what they did to Xinjiang in China. And people were very upset with him. So there's that. Um, the second thing is because of the scripts that we are running, we're presenting like each other's worst possible nightmare, right? Like if you are running a post-colonial narrative, who is the worst person you can be facing? Is this like implacable, cold, fascist, you know, nationalists with like just the jackboots and the tanks and the we don't care about your tears, we're going to keep shooting, right? And the way that Israel is coming off, it's easy to put the IDF into that script if that's what you've been taught, right? And so also on the other side, right, if you are seeing Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people who've been persecuted for 2,000 years, and you have people chanting in the street, "Gas the Jews," and people coming in and doing a pogrom and killing people, they're presenting like the same way like Nazis, right? And so therefore we're going to treat it like it's Nazis. That's what we said at the beginning, right? This triggering, like we are treating the pro-Palestinian movement the way we wish the world had treated the Third Reich in 1936.
Do you see an issue with that?
No, it's the right thing to do. I don't see any issue with that. I think that's 100% the right policy.
Can I rephrase it? Treating the pro-Hamas movement. There's nothing.
Treating the pro-Hamas
not
movement,
the pro-Palestinian movement.
No, anybody who's pro-Hamas.
But not pro. There's a difference between Palestinians.
I think that we need to break this script of in order for it to be broken, the pro-Palestinian community needs to understand that we're not going anywhere and that we have a right to be in the land, right? And to stop supporting terrorism or allowing terrorist supporters to hijack their message. I think the people who do support terrorism do their best to keep it blurry and to not have a clear division between the people who support terrorism and the people who don't. They like it blurry because that enables them to hide and use legitimate activism as a kind of a shield, right?
No, I think you're bingo.
And also the Israeli people have to stop saying crazy shit like let's nuke Gaza and whatever. Like we obviously got to knock that off.
Yeah.
That is completely counterproductive and morally wrong.
Yeah.
We should not nuke Gaza. Killing everyone in Gaza is not something that we should do. Israel should do their best to minimize civilian casualties. But we should not stop the war.
I have questions for you that I want to make sure we get to. Okay, I'm just going to pick some at random.
Ask all of them, and then we'll just chop it up, and get the best.
An award-winning British poet, who I personally, he's one of my favorites, so he's a very smart guy. His question was, how do you imagine the future, say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 100 years from now?
How do I imagine what?
The future.
What do you mean? Do you mean like what do I think is going to happen, or what do I want to happen?
Well, I'm just going to read you his question, and you can interpret it however you want, because he didn't offer context. How do you imagine the future, say 5 years from now, 10 or 100 years from now?
Okay. So I'll give you three. I'll give you three different answers to the same question.
Okay.
If we win this war, I think we could really end the conflict right now, this year or next year.
Okay.
Right? And that would involve smashing Hamas completely, driving all these pro-Hamas professors and journalists out of public life, and replacing them with a pro-Palestinian, pro-peace leadership, which has an interest in building a better life for the Palestinians, on the understanding that Israel's not going anywhere. And then we can do all the things that everybody wants, right? A seaport for Gaza, rebuild the airport, a big Marshall Plan to redevelop the whole place, pay the Palestinians to rebuild it. There's money on the table. There's already hundreds of millions been pledged. The money's there. And really set it up as it's a great piece of real estate. It's in a wonderful location. They could have a really good thing going on over there. Get a train line out down to Cairo and another one going up to Damascus. Could be beautiful. Ferries to Alexandria. I mean, it could be really, really nice. I think that you would have to have the Saudis or the UAE basically take a leading role in doing that. So that's one possible outcome. Another possible outcome is that the human rights people win and they get their ceasefire. Hamas stays in power, and then we're right back to square one, except that there's 20,000 people dead for nothing. We have to reimpose the blockade. The Gazans are choking, in their rubble. And we'll just keep the blockade for the next 20 years and do another 5 rounds of war. And we can just keep doing that indefinitely.
And that is the most nightmare scenario because it'll just ensure that the cycle continues.
Right. But we're so done. Israel's so done with the Palestinians and their leadership and the constant terrorism that there will be no appetite for any kind of peace talks or anything. It will just be fence it off, put machine gun turrets and barbed wire, and anybody comes to the border, shoot him. And that will be the reality if they get this ceasefire. That's what's going to be.
Third option.
I'm trying to remember what the third option was. That was one. That was two.
Was it
Yeah,
another country
those two. Huh?
another country, the China example?
I don't really want China to take over. I think that would be bad. The reason I did
Something
that,
like that.
check out at Lunacy Now. I've been selling Gaza to the Chinese. Selling Gaza to the Chinese is a bad idea for a number of reasons, most of which are obvious, but I will list them anyway. The human rights violations, and it would be a real game changer geopolitically to have China have a foothold like that in the Mediterranean, right on the border of Europe. And for those reasons, I don't think the Americans would ever go for it, and I don't think the Chinese want to do it anyway.
But another grouping of countries.
Yeah, in 100 years and everything, I would like to see, a federation or something like that. Another option is that Israel really does just kill everyone, right? That is not impossible.
That's what we feel like is happening. That's what we feel like is the plan. I mean,
It's not the plan. It for sure isn't the plan. I don't want to sound real callous here,
just got
but
killed yesterday.
if that was the plan, the Palestinians would already be dead.
They're dying. They're dying pretty fast. Okay, next question. A global non-profit leader on progressive Islam who created satellite chapters of Muslim progressivism all over the world asks, since 9/11, there have been ample studies on how to eradicate extremism and radicalism, and it has been scientifically proven that killing innocent civilians is not the way to go about it. What Israel is doing is the dumbest strategy. I'm assuming his position against a ceasefire is because he wants to eradicate extremism. The question is, what scientific study are you basing your position
on? I'm basing my position on the post-war settlement in Germany in 1945.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
The total eradication of the Nazi Party, followed by a massive economic investment plan, take over all the schools and teach them that Nazism was wrong. It worked great. We have no problems with the Germans now. But I will add that the massive economic investment and the education is a critical part of the thing, right? If we just have this war and we kill all these people and then we're just like, okay, sayonara, and walk off, that is not gonna work. We have to have a real post-peace plan, post-war, peace and development plan for afterwards. You have to win the peace. I'm not proposing like, okay, like bombs away and then just like that. That's stupid. And I support the immediate resignation of Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't agree with his government. And
Does
I
he
would
get to
really
just
like
go
to
off on
see.
holiday? Like, is there going to be any repercussions? Like, should there be any repercussions for his actions? Or does he just get to sort of sail into retirement?
As far as I understand it, there's going to be an inquiry within the Israeli government about whose fault this was. And if that inquiry is conducted honestly, it will obviously name him as the chief problem maker. Regarding what I assume you're alluding to, which is war crimes allegations, I recently read up on the Geneva Convention and stuff, and it seems like actually the Geneva Convention is shockingly broad, and actually Israel is acting pretty legally, and you can kill an awful lot of civilians and still be within the bounds of international
I've heard
human
contrary studies.
human rights law.
I've heard contrary, but we'll move on. Okay, a
Listen,
scholar.
but Israel is not a party to the Rome Statute and has not agreed to sign up to the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court.
That I agree
Uh,
with. I'm very suspicious of international bodies because they can go in any direction. Okay, third question.
which is why they haven't done. Oh yeah, next
Okay,
question.
because
Fine.
I've got quite a few and I don't think we have too much
Yeah,
time.
yeah, go for it.
A
Go for it.
scholar of myth and history asks if, not now, okay, we have 10 minutes. If,
I'm happy to do another one and just record
okay,
all of them and then
sure.
patch it together.
If for every Palestinian child killed, Israel creates at least 3 more terrorists, then hypothetically speaking, Israel has already created approximately 15,000 more terrorists, or people who hate the state of Israel and want justice and revenge for their people. Given that, is Israel safer today than it was on October 6th?
I just don't agree with the premise. I don't think that's true. I think if we really win and they see that the path of terrorism is not going to lead them anywhere good, then they will stop the terrorism as long as it comes with okay, here's what we're going to do now. It has to be a transition into we're not doing the terrorism thing anymore. You're done, but we are going to do this other thing, which is going to be positive and beneficial, right? So I don't agree that winning a war is impossible. Um,
I do.
but I do understand the concern for human life, and as I said at the beginning, every death is a tragedy, and I have nothing but compassion for the individual people in Gaza, and a lot of people who were innocent died in Germany also in the war against the Third Reich.
I mean, that goes without saying. I do think that if that we can get past this with a tremendous amount of investment in resources, trauma, care, first and foremost, right? I don't. I'm not optimistic. I don't think that's going to happen because look at the way the world is running. Look at the scripts that you mentioned. I think that was a
Let's see.
on thing.
That's what I would like to see. That's
Yeah.
what I would like to see, and I think there's a lot of effort for it. I'm actually quite optimistic.
Okay, here's
Next
my
question.
question. Then I have 3 more questions from others.
Yeah.
My question is, if you see your faith justifying Zionist supremacy, or if you see a path to a transcendent faith which unites all the Abrahamic traditions and their insights. The two sides of tribalism tend to be community versus the self, and the shadow side, or the ugly underbelly, which is a pattern of othering people outside the tribal identity, falling into an us versus them gridlock. I feel like Judaism is the foundation for monotheism, is a foundation for the human
Yes.
journey in so many ways. I think what you have
Yeah.
experienced as a people is our story as a human civilization. What I see within, the conflation of a national identity with a spiritual identity, I don't have an opinion on that because I don't think I'm educated enough to have an opinion on that. But I
Right.
do see that there is sort of like this blurry boundary where in order to be a Jew, you have to have this like zealotrous Zionist identity that says fuck everybody else. Like it's just gonna be I just don't see how that
Okay,
reconciles.
so oh man, we could talk a whole. This is a great question. But I'm gonna need more time to answer it, and you'll have to chop around.
Well, you have 6 minutes now. Can you answer it in 6 minutes? Then we can do the other three.
I'm gonna need more time, but I'll answer it. Okay, so the
Answer
first
it.
thing is
We'll give you time.
in terms of in terms of um the Abrahamic faiths coming together, that has to be through the temple. This is my personal opinion. This has to be through the temple. The Muslims have to end Muslim supremacy on the Temple Mount and allow Jews prayer rights on the Temple Mount.
I will agree with
It's
that.
the holy mountain. It is a absolute disgrace that we're not allowed to pray there.
Yeah.
And I think it's disgusting that the Hamas called that Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, as if Jews praying on the Temple Mount is a desecration. My personal preferred solution for the conflict is to build an enormous golden throne and a palace for the King Redeemer, the Melech HaMashiach, and declare that Israel is a theocratic monarchy run according to Torah law, and put all the rabbis in a reconstituted Sanhedrin, and then say, but we've got one problem. We don't know who the Messiah is. And since that, therefore, we're going to hold this halachic state in abeyance. And until that blessed day that God's glory is revealed and his anointed comes forward to sit on the throne, we're going to have a secular liberal democracy for all its citizens from the river to the sea.
That sounds really reasonable. Because we're both a bit crazy. That sounds really reasonable.
I don't think I don't think that is on the cards. But that is what I would like.
I do agree with Temple Mount. I think that it's absolute nonsense that it's only for Muslims. You know, the Substack piece I wrote, I don't know if you had a chance to read it, about the Holy Land. And it was called, Muslims basically need to let go of our death grip on the Holy Land, because we do have a very fixed identity.
Yeah, and I think that would help a lot in terms of calming Jews down and saying like, hey, like, okay, like they don't hate us, like they're not here to go to war, right? Like, when you make kind of symbolic concessions like that, you can end up getting a lot more practical things. So under my framing, Jews would have the right to live anywhere in the land. We would have access to the Temple Mount, access to all these holy sites. And then we'd have some kind of federation. The Palestinians would have, their own parliament and self-rule, but it would all be under this kind of constitutional monarchy with no king. That's what I would like. I am not in government. I'm sure it would not, let's end this and then do another one, and you'll ask me the rest of the questions.
Do you have any for me? We kind of went over it.
I do, but I want to answer your questions, really.
Let me do a couple more, because we've got 4 minutes. Okay. A Twitter follower asks whether teaching children from birth that they enjoy a special elevated status. This is Twitter, so you're gonna get like a level of trolling here.
Go for it.
Whether teaching children from birth that they enjoy a special elevated status in the eyes of God is a level of racist supremacy higher than Hitler's master race ideology.
Heavy question.
I mean, there's clearly like the bias in that question, but it's a question.
If you wanted to create a version of Judaism that was really crazy and fascistic, you've got what in the text to do it.
You've got what in the text?
You have what in the text to do it. There's enough stuff in the text that you could there's a whole thing about the laws of war brides, right? Like you could take war brides if we had a king and a halakhic state. You could definitely kidnap women on the battlefield and take them back to your house. Like that's in the text.
It doesn't give me comfort that this answer comes right after the question about creating a
What I'm saying is, if you want to go there, you can go there. If you want to make it crazy, you can make it crazy. You can make any religion crazy. There's plenty of crazy beliefs that have led to Salafi jihadism, and there's plenty of sects of Christianity which I abhor and which are violent and crazy. And yeah, it's in the text. Like, what do you want, right? However, in my opinion, the elevated status and the idea of being a light to the nations is a call to excellence, that you are supposed to try and live as nobly and as righteously as possible, such that you're walking in the world is an example to others and a call to them also to follow the path of righteousness
Do you think that
and draw closer to God.
do
Huh?
you think that a lot of people around the world feel that you're living countries living up to its elevated status?
I don't
That
think
we're
that they do feel
inspired?
that way. I feel like we've got a long way to go. I think that, but I also, yeah, I think it's a work in progress.
Look, for me,
The
the
lab,
Jewish people it comes down to values, right? So it was Jewish organizations, Jewish people like yourself, who gave me my first real chance in counter extremism, who helped me
uh-huh,
develop my skills. I mean, I can disagree with a lot of those people now, but I will not forget like what they've done and what we've and the
right, right,
friendships
right.
we've had. Those stand. Um, it was Jewish, like my most nourishing friendships have been with Jewish men, because and not just any Jewish man, it's been the spiritual Jewish men, because they bring those values to the table, they bring those values to the
Uh-huh.
friendship, and it's been a friendship unlike any others, right? Um, the culture, even when we were traveling with Clarion, for example, and we would travel, to different places around the country or whatever, there was always that consideration. Like I've worked with liberal organizations, I've worked with woke organizations, I've worked with like right wing, like fundy organizations. It was the
Yeah.
Jewish organizations that always asked, "Can you?" It's my job. I need to go somewhere, right? Like you tell me to go somewhere, I need to go somewhere. That's what I'm supposed to do. That's what I get paid to do. But it was only the Jewish organizations that asked, "Can you? I know you're a single parent to a child. Can you do this?"
Oh yeah,
And
family
understanding
first, man, for
exactly,
sure.
and understanding that you
Look,
can. I
okay,
mean,
yeah. So you can make it as crazy as you want to. If you were running this war according to halacha, you could make it a lot more intense. Right. So I think it's. I want to talk briefly. Hang on. Are you recording this? Record it.
yeah, no. Wait, oh yeah, hold on. Thanks for.
Recording in progress.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think it's worth bringing up that Bibi, this is something I wanted to talk about. That Bibi said, remember what Amalek did to you, and I want to talk a little bit about the concept of Amalek
Mm-hmm.
theologically, because I feel like most people have no idea what that's about. Right?
I know,
Uh,
like
I,
vaguely. I know it's been referred to. I know it's like some biblical thing, right?
okay, so Amalek is the tribe that attacked the Jews outside of, on their way out of Egypt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, theologically speaking, Amalek stands for eternal evil. And in every generation, we have an obligation to fight Amalek and eradicate them completely and
Mm-hmm.
obliterate their name and utterly uproot, crush, and destroy them. Um, and so the prime minister of the Jewish state calling Hamas Amalek is a really big deal rhetorically. You can't get more intense than that. And it's a kind of a very strong commitment to what I've been saying, which is utterly eliminating Hamas in every way. Um, who is Amalek? In the Purim story, Haman. I don't know how familiar people are with the Purim story.
Assume nobody
The
knows
the
anything.
king. Nobody knows anything. The king. Very briefly, King Xerxes Ahasuerus is king of Lord of all Asia, king of Persia. He's getting shit-faced with his bros. He says to his wife, Vashti, you need to get your tits out for the lads. I think they'll all really appreciate seeing that. She says, fuck you, I'm not doing it, you piece of shit. So he has her executed. Um, then he wakes up, kind of sobers up, and he's like, "Oh shit! Like I just beheaded my wife." Like he's all sad. So they're like, "Don't worry about that. We'll get you a new one." So they start rounding up all the hotties in the kingdom, throwing them in a van, and just dragging them into the palace, right? Um, and
Just your way of
and
telling the story is amazing. Go.
this is a kids' holiday. This
I
is a
know.
kids'
Yeah,
holiday.
go for it.
Um, and so he appoints this new advisor, Haman, to be lord of the kingdom, to be the vizier. Um, One thing leads to another. His favorite girl out of all the hundreds of women that have been schlepped over to the palace is Esther, who is a Jew. And Haman says to him, "Hey man, like, why don't we kill all the Jews in the kingdom?" And he's like, "Oh, sure, whatever. Why not? Do it."
Why did he say that,
And
though? What was the reason for it?
well, Haman just doesn't like the Jews because Mordecai refuses to bow. Mordecai, who's the head of the Sanhedrin and the Jewish minister, refuses to bow down to him. So Haman says, "I'm going to get rid of all the Jews in the kingdom." The king says, "All right, fine, I don't really care." But then Esther goes before the king and says, "I'm actually Jewish." And he kind of thinks, "Oh, well, I don't want to behead my queen." So instead of
He
killing all
had
the
my queen
Jews,
again.
they kill Haman and all of his supporters. Okay, so why am I bringing this up? What possible relevance does it have? Haman is an Amalekite, among the Amalekite, and he represents the eternal evil.
Wait, say that
So
again.
what?
Haman is what?
He's Amalek.
What was Amalek? A kind of people?
Amalek is what Bibi said Hamas
No,
is.
but what were Amalek? They were a group of people.
They were a tribe.
A tribe. Okay.
So if you want to take this in a race science direction, you could say that this is like deeply racist. But I'm taking it in a mythological direction.
Yeah.
Amalek is an idea and not a race of people.
I love that.
If you want to say that it's a race of people, you're in big trouble.
Can you make that
Huh?
distinction? Can you make that distinction again for folks? Because it's really important.
Yeah, okay. So Amalek is an idea about eternal evil and not a specific race. That would be deeply problematic for obvious reasons. It is an idea. So, how does this mythological evil get into the palace when he chooses his ego and commits a gross act of violence against women and by beheading his wife for refusing to get her tits out, which for all his drunk friends, which I'm sure you as a woman will agree was a deeply unreasonable thing to do. So that allows Haman into the picture. So the Amalek is wounded male vengeful pride that wants all of the world to bow and submit to its vision of this kind of ultra masculine victory. From a Kabbalistic point of view, you could say the klipa of Netzach, right? Like the inversion of victory. And that's it's fascism. That's the core of fascism. If you look at the Nazis, what happened? They were upset about Germany's defeat in World War One and traumatized because of the defeat in World War One. And therefore, instead of kind of reckoning with their vulnerability and kind of stepping into a positive future, they decided to double down on violent masculine pride and try to achieve this redemption and wrong what happened to them through militarism and force with obvious results. So too, the Islamic world has failed to reconcile with the traumatic loss of the Caliphate in 1924. And since then, every Muslim country has kind of, to a greater or lesser extent, really struggled, with the possible exception of Morocco, where the King of Morocco has a direct line of descendant to Muhammad, as also I believe the King of Jordan does. But that situation is different because Morocco was a pre-existing Islamic country that kind of continued with a brief period of French protectorate, but Morocco is a lot more stable because it has a more of a kind of a legitimacy than a lot of other Islamic countries. And this, violent Islamism, such as that we see with the Hamas, is a Amalek. It's this wounded masculine pride of humiliation, defeat, and taking that, pushing it inside, crunching it up, and turning it into just hate and violence. And the rape is part of that, right? Like the violence against women is not incidental. It's the core of that ideology because you should read a book called Male Fantasies, which is an analysis of the diaries of various leading fascists in the Third Reich. And so this they hated women because to be with a woman intimately is a moment of intense vulnerability, because you have to kind of be with that person in a very open way in order to have a proper experience. So they were very afraid of the annihilation that could come from having that encounter with femininity. And in the poem story, the king is able to have that vulnerability and reconcile his relationship with the femininity through his relationship with Esther, and then recognize that he needs to get Amalek out and destroy Amalek. And Jews are often hated by fascists because Judaism is seen as a feminine religion,
Can you talk to me a bit more about that?
puts femininity first. So I think that the Amalek thing is really profoundly true in a mythological sense, even though it may sound a little crazy to people who don't know the mythology. But that's what it's speaking to.
And I would agree with that. I would even say that in my years of covering Islam, and then that question being, why did Islam become this way? It was exactly taking the premise of my book and talking about the aspect of the dark Islam, or the dark mother, the dark goddess, the dark, essentially as a creative energy form, being the other eye of God. And that's what it was intended to be. And if I look at all the metaphysical stories that don't make sense, like, Muhammad going to Temple Mount, hiding in a cave, like even how Islam was received in a cave, these were all very metaphysical journeys. And so even the satanic verses, the entire first book talks about, the Song of the Human Heart talks about the satanic verses, and that was perhaps intentional, so that it was creating a wound that became a stigma. That, how do you make sure something lasts? You make it such a big story, such a big quandary, right? Then when we look at what happened, like my own experience as a Muslim woman, seeing what's the first sort of stages of awakening into what a religion is. Either you can stop there and you can sit there and say women's rights, or screw Islam forever, or you can go further and be like, okay, so how do we get here? What's the anthropology behind it? What's the history behind it? What's the mythology behind it? And what I find is this concept of Amalek it's beautiful, because that's what I find is when you look at jihad, when you look at even the hadiths that call for the death of Jews, right? Like that awful hadith, right? When you look at women's testimony in Sharia, when you look at all the things that make you uncomfortable in Islam, you look at where that aggressive, even the hijab, you look at where that aggressive masculinity has taken hold. And that aggressive masculinity has wiped out the feminine in Islam. So it's not that Islam, that there's a feminine Islam. Islam is feminine. So when you say Judaism is feminine, can you talk to me a bit about that? Because I haven't heard that before.
This is way off topic for this.
No, I definitely want to give you 3 minutes to talk.
Judaism is seen as feminine by fascists. Judaism prioritizes women in a number of ways, and I think the culture is quite matriarchal. Women tend to run the show. Women have the ability to the control of the lineage, which is not true without the principle of matrilineal descent. It makes a big difference, I think. But it's more that the principle of the faith is controlling masculine excess and self-control, really being at the heart of what's happened, what's going on. But this is all mythological. I think we should stick to the.
I'm going to, because I'm going to take what you just said now and go to the next question, which is someone asking, how do you respond to statements like this? Flatten everything, spare no school, no children's hospital, no old age home, delete the entire gene pool off the face of the earth.
Right.
It sounds like a case for genocide.
Right. That is.
And very Amalek, very
Trump
aggressive.
Trump would say that's locker room talk. I think there's every reason to take that seriously. If I was a Palestinian, I for sure would be taking it seriously. I see it as a kind of traumatic response to the person who's saying that being emotionally in winter 1942, and kind of stepping into that kind of primal fury. And we really need to be careful. Like that can absolutely, a person can fall into that kind of fury for sure, and you have to be really careful and guard against that within. Every person has an obligation to guard against that within themselves. And in times like this, when you have traumatic images being beamed directly into your house, it's real easy to get into that and be like, like the Bishop of Beziers said in the Cathar heresy, when he got to the city, and he just said, Caudite eos nobit enim dominus quisum eos, right? Like, kill them all, God will know his own. And that's absolutely not what should be done. And I wish that I think that's a sign that the Israeli leadership are themselves emotionally triggered, and they're not speaking when they say something like that from a cool head. And if they are feeling like that, they should calm down before they speak to the press.
Last question. Soft one. A writer asks you to respond to this statement. Look at who is growing the olive trees and who is burning them. That will tell you everything you need to know.
That's such a funny thing to say, because from our point of view, we're the ones who are growing the olive trees, and the Palestinian leadership are the ones who are burning them. They're the ones who did the October 7th massacre. They're the ones who rejected the peace deals. They're the ones who did the Intifada. What we're trying to do is return to our ancestral homeland. Like I said, like I think that this idea that Israel is an illegitimate settler colony and all the Palestinians have to do is resist enough, and then Israel will kind of disintegrate. That's really at the core.
Fantasy. That's a complete fantasy.
It's a fantasy that's dangerous because of the script that we're running, which is that this is our homeland and anybody who attacks us is a Nazi. This script is what's led us to this pass, right? Because every action that the Palestinians take to resist triggers the Israeli response to be like fight, 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 and the Palestinian side sees it as increasing fascism, and the Israeli side sees it as increasing also fascism, Nazism from the Palestinian side in an attempt to wipe us out. So both sides are playing out the role of the villain in the other person's script, because we're running different scripts in our heads when we talk about this and the narrative form. So each act of escalation, we're all thinking, now we'll see. I see a lot of Palestinians on Twitter saying like, where's their humanity? Why don't they see that this picture of a child who's dying, surely they'll stop? And it's like, no, like that's not relevant. It's not that I don't feel bad, it's just not relevant.
I want to draw attention to that, because when you say it's not relevant, it sounds awful. It sounds awful, right? But when you say it, I agree with that, because when I'm talking to you,
I do feel bad. I'm not trying to say
feel
like,
bad,
who cares?
but
I'm
you're
trying to
looking
say
at the
like, I
facts
do
of
feel
what's-
bad. I think every death, is a tragedy. The children, but it's just that in order to preserve our lives and our state and our existence, we have to eradicate Hamas. It's not optional, and therefore, like, there isn't an amount of emotion that the Palestinian side could show that would get us to be like, all right, we'll liberate Palestine. Like, what do you even mean? That was my question for you. Like, when people talk about ending the occupation, what do they mean by that? What do they mean by free Palestine?
I think there's a lot of different understandings of it. I think most of it, the bulk, is the naivety that you can just let them go on their merry way. You let them go on their merry way, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to become a terrorist state. At the state that it's in right now, it's going to be a terrorist state. They're going to have full and complete. The first thing they're going to do is attack Israel again and again and again. I mean, there is beyond the conflict of Gaza and Hamas, beyond the heartbreaking social issues, right? Like the thousands of children that have been detained. I don't know how that has to do with Hamas. There are these factors, right? These stories that are heartbreaking. But beyond that, when you look at what's going on. I think a lot of people, what we're dealing with is people who haven't been educated. Like, so for example, I talk about Islam. I studied it for 22 fucking years before I wrote my book, right? You have to do the homework. And a lot of times people see the images, they see whatever, and you have an emotional response, and
so they just jump in.
But they don't do the work to understand the broader spectrum of, like, how do we get here? What's the mentality? Like, one of the things I've been saying is, right now it's not a religious war. Right now it's about, a social, political, ideological issue between two different sides. The holy war will come.
I agree. I think there's room for Islam in Israel. I would like them to build a statue of Saladin with Maimonides together. That would be cool.
It'd be beautiful. But I think, when you look at the ceasefire, when you look at just stop the occupation, I think basic rights first, security and rights. I can't speak to this from any sort of policy level because I've never fucking been there. So how can I sit from America and give my opinion on what should happen?
Right.
But I think
I support giving the Palestinians the maximum level of personal freedom and opportunity that can be done without compromising Israel's security.
That's the basic start.
Whatever that would be, we can argue the toss about the policy in a different context, but that's just an optimization. Then it becomes just an optimization question.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a lot of I know that there's a lot of bureaucratic, ego-driven, whatever reasons why it hasn't happened. But I do think that until the Palestinian cause disabuses itself of the notion that Israel can be wiped out, we're not going to get anywhere. That said, the for want of a better word, freaking out by various Israeli and Jewish leaders is not helping our cause, and we need to be a lot more level-headed and empathetic in the way that we do business. And it sucks for the Palestinians in Gaza right now, and for their supporters worldwide. It must be very scary, especially if you have family there or whatever. And I hope that we can come together, community, to talk in a more practical way about solutions rather than just screaming at each other from opposite sides of a police barricade.
And I saw, did you see the Piers Morgan interview with Mohammed Hijab and Rabbi Shmuley? I don't know their names.
I did, yes.
Such a fucking shit show. Like, that's national primetime TV, international platform, and that's
they're just ambulance chasers, though. They came across like they were in it for themselves. I've not met Rabbi Shmuley Bater. Perhaps he's wonderful. I haven't met him, or Mohammed Hijab, so I can't speak to that. I didn't rate that debate. I didn't think it was practical. They were just insulting each other. That was it. And it's not a football match. I don't see a reason to take sides. I love to be, I don't see that there's a pro-Israel and a pro-Palestine, because that implies that if one side wins, the other loses. And I don't like that framing. I don't think it's healthy and it's not constructive. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
I honestly think the most constructive thing I've seen is this.
But everybody has to do their own bit, which is why the Jewish world is trying to do this campaign to drive everybody out of public life who is supporting the Hamas, because we just can't do business with them. We cannot break bread with them. And I understand, and listen, and I'm sure that goes both ways. And if people are supporting the genocide of the Palestinian people, then driving them out of public life makes sense. I've definitely been around that kind of language. I've seen it. I've definitely been times in my life when I've been extremely angry and quite hateful, and everybody has to be on their guard against that. And I think if people can change, but they have to change. They have to do it themselves. They can't be, and if people are going to be in a public position, they can't be sitting there going, yeah, fuck it, flatten the place. You can't have that. So, all right, I think we've
take plant medicine before they
more than enough. Chop it, however you want to chop it.
Do you have any questions for me?
I
think we covered a lot.
What, if anything, could Israel do to convince Muslims not to hate us? Israel and all the wider Jewish community.
I don't
We see.
think I wouldn't say the word is I do feel hate, right? I told you I have some spiritual mystical experiences and I can't
Yeah,
control it. It just happens. And
sure.
sometimes I embody things, right? And so a few months ago I embodied the energy of like a troll, which was very distinct to what I'm about to say now.
Right, right.
When I was at the peak of like being on Twitter and following everything, I felt hate. I've never
Sure.
felt hate before. I can say I have never felt it before. Felt a lot of things. Hate wasn't one of them. And what I embodied was, what I mean by embodied is, it's not an idea, it's not a thought, it's not a feeling. You physically feel it with your body.
Yeah. Hate feels very like when you have this anger just like flowing through your whole body, like it's gonna pour out of
Yeah,
you.
it
Yeah,
felt like this
yeah,
this river that's just it. The dam
yeah.
breaks and the river goes, and you can't
Oh,
just tell the
oh.
river to you should not
Very
be
powerful
hateful.
feeling.
It's
It's a
very
very, very
powerful, and it
powerful.
has to go somewhere, which is what I
Right.
learned from embodying it. And that's why I sort of stepped away from it for a while, because I'm like, I'm picking up way too much right now. And whatever, if I'm sensitive this week, I don't know. So I have to like measure myself. But I do know that the broader Muslim community, having felt hate, like physically felt it myself, in that experience, I do know that what people are feeling, there are people who hate you, right? There are people who hate Jews, who hated Jews
Sure.
2 months ago, who will hate Jews more 2 months from now. They're there forever, and I think that is a reality that we haven't done a good enough job of as a human civilization. And I've had issues with the way that even the ADL talks about anti-Semitism. They just go and give speeches and talk about hate symbols, which is the same effectiveness as telling people not to take drugs when you've just talked to a kid about the 10 different drugs you cannot take, they
Yeah,
will
yeah,
now go
yeah.
take, So the way
Right.
that we go about these campaigns, the millions of dollars that goes into like the speaking tours, the workshops, they're fucking bullshit. They don't work, right? So we need better ideas. But I would say it's not hate. I would say it's other than the people who do hate you, the large response right now is deep frustration. And
Frustrated. Yeah.
this sort of frustration with this sort of just the assault, the way it's rolling out, the death tolls. I would say
Uh,
that. I would say that the Jewish reaction is more my personal frustration. I feel like you guys could learn a little bit of empathy, even if it's just for showmanship, because you do have a PR game to win, and you're not winning it.
Don't talk about the PR game. You're also saying that you feel like we're lacking empathy. That's okay to say.
I feel frustration for, like the inability to understand what somebody else is going through, and only make it. I cannot I understand it more now, having spoken to you, understanding some of the triggers, the trauma, the epigenetics of like, okay, your grandparents went through World War, II. It's still in your bloodstream. If a woman, epigenetics, right? Like
Right.
whatever my mother and my grandmother went through, my cells from my being were already my grandmother, right? Before I was even conceived, because it was in my mom. So it's like 3 generations are in one woman, for
Right.
example. And so whatever a woman went through 3 generations ago, I'm physically, genetically still wired for those feelings, that trauma. So you look at World War II, it wasn't that long ago, right? I mean, the public consensus among like high schoolers is like, oh, it was like 100 years ago. If something was 10 years ago, it was 100 years ago. If something was in the last century, it might as well have been 1,000 years ago. It might as well be myth at this point. But understanding that, okay, the psychology and the emotions, the stories that you've been telling have helped me really understand the perspective, so that I can bring more empathy when I'm dealing with my own frustration.
I want to bring more empathy to it. I think we could do a better job with bringing empathy. So you're saying that there's a lack of empathy, there's a frustration. And what's the goal with it? To do what exactly? To get it to stop in whatever way that
I don't
takes?
think you're going to stop. I think I think having voices, like my voice, right? Like my voice is nothing in the grand scheme of anything. It's really nothing. But having even my voice as someone who is pro-Jewish, who's pro-Israel, who's had the credentials, but is saying, let's just look at what's going on. They cannot be just a blank like slip to go and do whatever you want without any sort of pause or criticism. I think Judaism has that, right? The 13th man thing or whatever, like for every 12 people who agree, someone has to say something different. Torah has the thing where you're encouraged to disagree with your ancestors who were scholars and whatever.
Look, In terms of
Someone
the
needs to
war itself,
disagree.
you definitely would not want this war to be conducted according to the laws of war as they exist
I
in
don't mean
the
that.
Bible.
I mean that there is a culture in Judaism that is open to criticism
Yes,
and
yes, yes.
critique.
There's a culture of dissent for
And
sure.
there needs to be some kind of critique because while I'm on your side and will do everything in my power to draw attention to how you guys are hated by a segment of the
No,
population.
you don't have to be on my side right now. We're just
No,
talking
no, but my
like
point is that that is always going to be my case. I can disagree and critique and criticize, and I'm still on your side in terms
and so
of
you're saying there's like a feeling that nothing Israel's just acting without restraint, that there's no
Israel can do no
break,
wrong,
that there's
basically.
no breaks.
Israel can do no wrong, and no one is imperfect
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
or
And
perfect. You know
therefore,
what I'm
by
saying?
going on all these rallies and the marches and the shouting about it, that Israel will
I'd, you know,
go
I would.
down, or at least that they will have raised their voice and said something, even if it continues, they did their bit.
I think so. At the very least, I think for the United States, it's a different game. I think where it's clear our leaders aren't listening to us. Um, we've got our own issues with look what happened in Hawaii, Maui, just a few months ago, and they got each family got $700. Let alone how it happened that the law enforcement was pushing people back into the fire.
Crazy.
Like it's fucking psychotic, right? And we don't
Yeah.
expect empathy and genuine care from our leaders, but when it's given to Ukraine, when it's given to Israel, that's a different issue. We have our issues here
Sure.
where we're just
Yeah, it's a
not
lot of
seen.
money, and for that reason also, I would like this conflict. This should be the last Gaza war, like end of it. Come
Yeah.
on, how many Gaza wars have we seen in our lifetime? It's
Yeah.
crazy. It's crazy, just on and on and on, again, again, again. What? And then just rearm and go back to it? No, one way or another, this has to be the end
It
of it.
has to be the end of it. And if that means, you know, if you continue the war, you continue it, but I would strongly recommend like a little bit of soul searching in how it's going about. If
As I
whoever,
said, I hear that. I hear what you're saying. I hear that the body count is a little high. I see how that it can be seen that way.
it is
As
high,
far as I'm aware, huh?
it is high. It can't. A number is a number.
Honestly, I expected the casualties to be way more.
Probably will be. I'm
I
restraining myself from commenting on
and
that.
a number is a number. Listen, I don't know how many of those people are children. I don't know how many of those people are Hamas fighters, right? If it turns out that that number has been exaggerated by the Hamas, and actually 3,000 of those people were killed by Hamas's rockets, and the rest of them is 80% Hamas fighters, I feel like that's totally acceptable. If it
I
turns
think
out
that's
that
a
Israel's been
very
bombing a
generous
refugee
figure.
camp and there's one Hamas guy and 80 children, like that's not okay,
So that's
you
not.
know?
So you agree that bombing a refugee camp for one person was like not okay.
If you kill one Hamas guy and like 80 kids, that's not okay.
So then you do agree
So
that that was not okay.
I wouldn't agree with that. That ratio seems off to me.
Period.
I'm not
Period. No
huh?
matter how many kids are in a refugee camp, you have refugees. You don't bomb a refugee camp to kill one Hamas. I mean, I can't
Depending on
argue
the
this
level of
because
depending on
either
the
you see
level
it
of
or
the
you
target,
don't.
depending on the level of the target, it could be acceptable to bomb it or not, depending on the level of the target, the number of Hamas people who are there, and the risk of collateral damage. You know how much collateral damage is there going to be. I'm not privy to those conversations. I haven't been in the army, and I hope that Israel is taking the steps that it says it's taking to keep that limited. I understand that the Biden administration has been putting pressure on Israel to keep it 100 in that regard, and I hope that they're listening to them.
I think that pressure is because
That's
of the U.S. reaction. I don't. That
huh?
pressure wasn't there until the protests started.
No, no, no. That pressure was there on the first day. They said, "Listen, you've got to." In Biden's speech, I watched it. He said, "You've got to do this within the laws of war." Right? Um, I yeah, I've ideally this could be done with no civilian casualties at all. I think that they went in a little quick. I think that maybe they could have, I would have liked to have seen them sit down with the Saudis and the French and the British like first before they went in and had like a kind of a conference to be like, all right, like what do you want to do here?
Was it
Build a
you
little.
that said they should have mourned their dead first? 40
That was my
days?
mother's position.
Yours?
She said that we should have had 3 days of national
Yeah.
mourning first. But again, like that's my opinion. I don't want this to come off like callous, like I don't give a damn.
I
But
don't think
equally,
you
like
would be here
I
if you
really
didn't give
don't
a damn.
know. I really don't know, right? What's happening on the ground? I read the news reports, I see what's happening, I see the casualty figures. I don't trust the Hamas numbers. It could be a lot more, and it could be a lot less, right? That's 13,000 that they claim. As far as I'm concerned, the numbers somewhere between 5,000 and 30,000, right? Like it really could be a lot more. I don't know how many people are trapped under the rubble. It could be a lot less. It could be 80% Hamas fighters were killed. It could be 30% Hamas fighters were killed. I have no way of knowing that. So if Israel is just indiscriminately bombing and killing as many people as possible with no regard, that's not okay. They've said that they're doing it precision, whatever. I hope that that's true. Some of the
Two
rhetoric that's coming out
journalists,
from the Israeli front bench is bonkers, and they should shut up and get a decent press secretary.
two journalists were killed yesterday in their
Journalists,
homes. Were they Hamas supporters? Were they hiding Hamas? One guy,
I,
there was a
I
video of
don't
a
know.
guy
This is the
who,
thing. I don't know. The thing, Hamas is so evil that they are using all of these roles that we would traditionally think of as inviolable schools, hospitals, journalists, embedding their people in these institutions and using it to get Western sympathy while themselves being terrorists, right? Were these two individuals terrorists or really journalists? I don't know.
we don't know. I will give you that. We don't know. But
That's my answer. That's my answer.
but given that, we can't say we don't know to every single, and there's a lot of stories coming out.
We say, I believe the IDF more than I believe the Hamas. I think that
Believe
Hamas are
either.
doing everything they can to use the international media as a weapon of war.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to just get on with it and win as quickly and decisively as possible, and drown out the noise. And I know that sounds hardcore.
No, I'm thinking
Um,
that even beyond this war, there's a lot of work to do for Jews in the years ahead. Image rehabilitation, outreach. You know,
yeah,
you've gone and
yeah,
tried to
yeah.
counsel people and
And
blackmail
also,
people.
I do think that, and a lot of that will be with the Palestinians. The thing that kills me is a lot of this stuff was being done prior to this war. We were on the verge of a normalization with Saudi Arabia. A lot of the people who were murdered in the terrorist attack on October 7th were left-wing activists who dedicated their lives to reaching out to Palestinians and trying to build closer connections, right? Like the second intifada happened as a response to the Oslo Accords, where they were offered, a Palestinian state and all this stuff. They built an airport in Gaza, and it was destroyed because Hamas came in and took over. So like,
Then it
I
goes
don't
back to
know. I
Bibi.
don't know
Why are
what to
you
say about
funding?
that. You know
Why
what
are
I
you
mean?
funding Hamas?
Huh?
Hamas funding is the question. Then where are these guys getting their money
So
from?
that is a broader question. That is again beyond the scope of my
Yeah.
expertise. I'm not an international financier, and I don't know how they do the networks of the money. I hope that the people who do with that will be on it. My angle is the ideology and the media stuff, and I think that we need to understand that Israel isn't going anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and the Jews need to understand the Palestinians aren't going anywhere. Obviously, I'm biased. I have my own biases. I think that most of the hate is coming from the pro-Hamas side and not from our side, but I would say that. So, yeah, that's where I'm
Listen,
holding.
that's a
I
good.
hope I hope that this has been helpful
I think
and
it's been
informational. I've
tremendous.
learned a lot from talking to you. I don't want to dismiss. It sounds like you're saying that there's like a lot of pain in the Muslim community and a lot of kind of sense of like, why is this happening? Like, how could this be? Like, don't they care? Is that accurate?
I think American Muslims are feeling that way towards the Democratic Party. There are a lot of Muslims who genuinely aren't caught up in the activism and the emotional responses or the images of the news. They have a very unpopular view, which is, well, this, why doesn't another Arab nation take them? Which I don't agree with. I think that's complicated. But they would say things like, well, this has been going on forever. Well, they will say all the things that you will agree to, right? That are common sense. I think it's just, the ways that dehumanization creeps in. Because you guys are getting triggered, right? But so are we, because we've been dealing, especially our generation, like my generation, since 2001, we've been dealing with fighting, our, like 13 years ago, I named my half Mexican kid, I let him have his Mexican last name because I didn't want him to have a Middle Eastern last name. And I gave him an American first name, and I put his real name in the middle because I just knew we were going to get
you didn't want him to deal with it. I understand that for sure. We're going to cut out in a minute.
The point is that dehumanization plays out in so many different ways, and I think that is the heart of the grievance on both sides. And if we can address that through conversations like this, we have a chance in hell. Beyond that, with the scripts and the platforms as they are, it's not going to help.
100% agree, Shireen. Thank you so much for speaking with me, and I pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and I wish only good things for the children in Gaza.
And I hope you get access to Temple Mosque.
Thank you.
That would be amazing.
All right.
So we can just knock it down and bring on the Messiah and build the temple again. I mean, we all want the same thing. Why don't we just do it?
I don't think we need to rebuild the temple. I think that would be a crime. I think those far-right Israelis who want to blow it up, that's too much. We can't do that. And the attacks and everything, that all has to stop, the settler violence and things like that.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this podcast, I invite you to subscribe, like, and leave a review. You're also welcome to share it with your community and keep up with updates on future episodes. For more on my work, you can visit ShireenQudosi.com. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to your next visit.